This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The French army chief heads to Niger after a mass attack leaves over 70 soldiers dead. Algeria holds a presidential vote despite a push for a boycott. And how mobile courts are being used to dispense justice in remote parts of South Sudan. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. With me in studio is Raman Yang with a preview of your business news.
That's right, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Ethiopia and the IMF have reached an agreement, a preliminary agreement on a near $3 billion bailout. And headline inflation in Ghana has gone up by 50 basis points in the month of November to hit 8.2%. We'll have the details of those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. We start in Niger, where President Mahamadou Issoufou has cut short his trip to Egypt after an attack on a remote army base in western Niger left at least 73 soldiers dead. Around 12 other soldiers are still missing. The camp borders Mali, which has witnessed several militant attacks. This is the deadliest attack against Niger's army. The Sahel region is under siege from militants linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL. A senior military official from Niger says the attackers employed a new and coordinated military strategy.
Le mardi 10 décembre 2019.
On Tuesday, December the 10th, 2019, the detachment of the innate military reconnaissance post near the border of Mali was attacked by heavily armed terrorists, estimated at several hundred. There followed a combat of rare violence combining artillery fire and the use of kamikaze vehicles by the enemy on the position from 1500 hours to 1800 hours local time. Reinforcements dispatched to the position allowed for the stabilization of the situation that is currently under control. On the enemy side, an important number of terrorists were neutralized. A search and pursuit has been launched in the footsteps of the terrorists fleeing from our borders. The National Ministry of Defense, in the name of the President of the Republic and Supreme Army Chief, pays homage to the defense forces for their unfailing engagement and gives his saddened condolences to the families of the victims and wishes a prompt recovery for the injured.
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has expressed support for Niger following this attack. He has since dispatched his military chief to Niger to assess the situation. Meanwhile, speaking after arriving at the European Union meeting in Brussels, Macron also said he agrees with the president of Niger, Mahamadou Issoufou's proposal to postpone a meeting with Sahel leaders. That meeting was set for the 16th of December. It's now been pushed to early next year, and the focus will be the rising militancy in the Sahel.
I will have the opportunity to explain where France intends to go. I made the decision last night with President Issoufou to postpone the summit that was planned in Pau next Monday because of the many deaths that Niger, unfortunately, had to endure. I want to reiterate all my solidarity with the people of Niger. So early January, we will hold a summit under the Bakane format, if I may say, with the 5 member countries of the Sahel. I will have the opportunity to discuss with our European partners on this subject.
Well, let's bring you more on this. We're now joined by CGTN's Stéphane de Vries in Paris. Stéphane, to begin with, tell us more about France's response to this attack. We understand that a military chief has been dispatched to Niger.
Yes, that's correct. The military chief is going there to assess the situation and also to reassure the countries in the Sahel region of the fact that France is still supporting them. There were some tensions, or there are some tensions between the French-led Operation Barkhane, so-called Barkhane, started in 2014 in the Sahel region with the 5 nations in the Sahel. France, of course, being the former colonial power, and indeed Emmanuel Macron more or less summoned the 5 countries to come to France next week for a summit about the situation in the area, which is actually increasingly dangerous. There are more and more attacks by jihadists on military positions in the region. So that's the reason why the military chief was sent by France to Niger to, of course, to assess what happened exactly, and also to support the countries in the region.
And of course, we know that the Sahel Security Summit that was scheduled to take place on the 16th has now been postponed. Tell us more about that decision.
Well, the idea was indeed to organize a summit next week in the south of France. Emmanuel Macron has cancelled this visit. The idea was that the strategy of this Operation Barkhane, which is already going on for 5 years, was being discussed. Emmanuel Macron also said that he wanted to make sure that the countries involved were clear about what they were doing in the fight against terrorism and jihadist groups. At the meantime, these countries also considered this more of a summon. Of course, France being the former colonial power, the relations between the region and France are sometimes a bit complicated, but now this summit has been cancelled and it has been postponed until the beginning of next year. But it is clear that there are many questions about this operation, also because France 2 weeks ago lost 13 soldiers in Mali in the same operation, and now in France there's criticism about this operation. So Emmanuel Macron has to reassess this strategy and to see whether they can continue with this operation or not.
And do tell us more about what goes into that decision in terms of reassessing France's military operations in the Sahel, dating back 5 years, as you mentioned, France suffering a major loss of military lives just 2 weeks ago. Is France essentially stuck between a rock and a hard place, facing criticism at home and in Francophone Africa?
Yeah, it seems like that indeed. France is present with 4,500 troops in the region. Now that seems like a considerable force, but you have to realize that this area is about the size of Europe. So it's a relatively small number of troops compared to the size of the area that has to be secured. Now the results are mixed, and that's maybe that's an euphemism. So indeed there's criticism at home here in France, but also France is criticizing the countries in the Sahel that they are not doing enough. But the problem is that when France and also some other international forces like the UK and Estonia, who are also present and part of this international operation, when they leave the region, then probably the countries like Mali and Burkina Faso will transform into complete chaos, maybe a new Somalia or Afghanistan. So it's a very, very complicated situation that has become even trickier by the killing of the over 70 soldiers in Niger earlier this week.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that. Stefan de Vries joining us there from the French capital of Paris. Well, staying with this story, let's now cross over to Lagos, where we're joined live by Dixon Osagie. He is a security expert. Dixon, it's a pleasure to have you with us this evening. Now, 73 soldiers killed. This attack certainly seems as though it must have required a lot of planning, access to good intelligence and manpower. It would suggest that these militant groups now have an edge over the national or state forces in these countries.
Lindy, thank you very much. Good evening from Lagos, Nigeria. I first of all want to use this privilege to appreciate China Global TV. You guys are doing so well. I'm bringing the news to the doorsteps of millions of people all over the world. I want to appreciate you guys, and I want to assure you that you guys are also playing a role in counter-insurgency in a non-kinetic manner.
Let's stick to the matter at hand.
Going by your question, Linda, yeah, going to your question, it's quite regrettable that a lot of people Soldiers are dying every day, and the attack that took place in Burkina Faso in Niger Republic is a worrisome one. I just don't want to believe that this will continue to happen because 71 soldiers died like that. It's not acceptable. In a war game, a soldier is supposed to contend with about 100 enemy. Looking at this, I want to fault the intelligence of the Niger Republic. I also want to fault their operational methodology because it takes a level of a time for you to advance in contact with your enemy. In phases of war, Lindy, we'll have the advance, we have the attack, we also have the withdrawal. Quite regrettable in this our African region, most of our people, our soldiers, our military, are fond of playing the defensive role instead of going before the enemy, instead of the attacking methodology. When you play a defensive role in curtailing insurgency, your enemy will keep pushing on you, and it will dissipate your strength and your energy. So what I think the Niger government should also do is to ensure they carry out an effective surveillance. You need to get the information, where is your enemy coming from? Because your enemy cannot just disappear and take on you and kill about 71 soldiers. That is a serious error from the Niger military. Niger is a population of about 21 million people. Taking 71 soldiers from 21 million is a big numbers. I sympathize with the family of the people that lost their lives, and I wish the Niger government a quick recovery.
Well, Dixon, it seems as though that these countries in the Sahel may need more support. There is France, there's the G5 Sahel force, but do you think there needs to be more international support or even more regional action? Where is ECOWAS, for instance?
ECOWAS are playing a very big role. International support are also playing a big role. Lindy, let's be sincere with ourselves. If you bring all the world together to come and play a big role financial-wise, equipment-wise, and ammunition-wise, if your operational methodology are faulty, you can't succeed in your operation against this enemy. Let's not look at international support, because here in Nigeria, for example, billions of dollars are being spent in curtailing these guys. And we are also suffering from national sabotage, internal sabotage. These people sabotage the government, especially conflict entrepreneurs. They don't want this war to end because they are making money from this war. They are making a living from this war. So even if the ECOWAS and the whole world wants to come to support African region or support the Niger government, if there is no internal discipline, there isn't going to be a result. So what we are expecting is internal discipline. And secondly, we are not taking it very properly from a soldiering point of view, because you observe that apart from the Air Force, the Nigerian Army and other African army, they don't have an attack base, helicopter attack base that they can use in pushing on this enemy. The army in every given state, Niger, Nigeria, Mali, the military itself, the army specifically, needs an aviation base. If you don't have an aviation base, you will continue to suffer from this terrorist act, because the aviation base is going to support the firing power from the ground troops. That will dissipate the enemy.
Thank you so much, Dixon. Thank you so much for that analysis. Dixon Osage, a security expert, joining us there from Lagos. Now let's shift our attention to North Africa. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says America wants to work with Russia to end the Libyan conflict. Pompeo made the statement following discussions with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov.
We want to work with the Russians to get to the negotiating table, have a series of conversations that ultimately lead to a disposition that creates what the UN has been trying to do for an awfully long time. Foreign Minister Lavrov told me directly yesterday he is prepared to be part of that, to continue it. I reminded him that there is a weapons embargo that is still in place in Libya, and that no nation ought to be providing incremental material inside of Libya, and that we have reached out not only to the Russians but to others who are providing weapon systems there and saying it's not in the best interest. If we're going to get to a political resolution, that is not the appropriate path forward. It only creates more risk, more violence, and moves us further away from the political resolution that Libya so desperately needs, and that will ultimately be the pathway to getting a Libya with a governing coalition that gets the outcome right there.
Let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Britain's vote in a high-stakes election dominated by Brexit. And Algeria holds presidential elections despite a push for a boycott.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
It's a big day in Britain as people head to the polls to vote in a general election that could, at the very least, decide the future of Brexit. It is also the country's third general election in 4 years. Let's cross live now to London for the very latest. Naveed Jabarkil is standing by. Naveed, of course, polls are closing at 10 p.m. local time. That's in a few hours from now. Just tell us how the voting process has been conducted over the course of today.
Till 10 p.m, so in about 5 hours' time. Voters are taking part across the United Kingdom, from Scotland to Northern Ireland, Wales and here in England. There'll be 650 seats up for grabs, known as constituencies. Each one of those areas will select the Member of Parliament who will form the next Parliament. Boris Johnson, the incumbent Prime Minister, cast his vote earlier today here in Westminster in central London, along with his dog Dylan, which I believe we may have some pictures of. The main opposition party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, his constituency is in North London. He cast his vote there, while other party leaders like Liberal Democrats leader Joe Swinson up in Glasgow in Scotland, on the outskirts of Glasgow, as well as the SNP, Scottish National Party leader Nicola Sturgeon, voting there in Glasgow as well. This is the first election in the December since 1923, almost 100 years. It was called by Boris Johnson 6 weeks ago to try and break the Brexit impasse, he said in Parliament. And it's the third time British voters have gone to the polls in just 4.5 years, following other votes in 2015 and 2017. So there may be a case of voter fatigue. Aside from that, though, in terms of logistics, we've seen voters up and down the country braving some pretty strong winter weather. It's raining in parts of the UK as we speak. Up in the north of Scotland, there was even some snow that some voters had to wade through in order to get to polling stations. Polls close at 10 p.m, as you say. Shortly after that, there will be a major exit poll, which may give some indication about which way this will go, but full results we're expecting to come out sometime on Friday morning. Back to you.
Well, Naveed, of course, Boris Johnson's dog Dylan, not the only one to make an appearance at the polling stations today. We understand hashtag dogs at polling stations has been trending across the country. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't just Boris Johnson, but the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, who is a member of the Labour Party. He also turned up to a polling station with a dog. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition Labour Party, turned up with something of a costume of Elmo, a puppet from an American television program. So that's why that's been trending on Twitter today. But these leaders, all of them, remember, vying for seats as well. Because of the UK's political setup, they'll have to run for their seats and ensure that they get seats if they want to be a part of the future future Parliament. That includes the incumbent Prime Minister Boris Johnson, whose seat is here in the west of London as well. But still a few hours to go here. 10 p.m. GMT is when the polls close, and shortly after that we'll start to have results trickling in.
We'll be eagerly awaiting that. Thank you so much, Naveed Jabarkil, joining us there live from London. Now, Algerians have also been voting in a highly disputed election. Critics say all candidates should be removed because of their ties to the unpopular former government. The vote follows the ousting of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, who was forced to resign in April after 2 decades in power after anti-government demonstrations across the country. Polls opened at 0700 GMT and are expected to close at 1800 GMT.
I call on all Algerian brothers and sisters to come out in large numbers in order for these elections to succeed, and in order for us to enter into the new republic where every Algerian man and woman hopes for, a republic for the youth, an Algerian republic of the free.
I hope that this presidential election is good for the Algerian people. I also hope that this presidential election brings good to Algeria, God willing.
It's the third time this year that Algeria has attempted to hold presidential elections. Protests in the northern African state have twice forced authorities to delay elections in April and July. The voters are choosing among 5 candidates.
I did my electoral duty this morning, and I think that all Algerians are free in their positions, whether by participating, voting, or boycotting.
These are fateful presidential elections for Algeria, and I hope that Algerians will come forward to vote. This is the future of their country.
Meanwhile, thousands of people have taken to the streets in central Algiers, calling for a boycott of the elections. They insist that the process is a mockery intended to keep the ruling elite in power. Absence of international observers is also a worrying factor for them.
Calling for a boycott does not help in my opinion, but democratic practice guarantees it, and they are free to do so.
The Algerian army says elections is the only way to restore order in the country. The country's independent electoral authority has reiterated its commitment to a free and fair poll. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
And let's go to South Sudan now, where a mobile court has been introduced in the western Equatorial town of Yambio. The court system is being used to dispense justice in remote parts of the country that lack legal structures. More than 100 cases will be heard by the end of the year. CGTN's Astatal reports.
A suspect is led into a courtroom in Yambio. His is the first case to be heard. Judges fled the area since conflict erupted in the western equatorial region in 2016, leaving behind a vacuum. Richard Nimeri has had his case delayed since 2017.
My case had taken about 3 years, but I am happy that we now have a judge from Juba. Sometimes delay in justice may cause bad things and people will start revenge. Therefore, I am very grateful to UNIMIS and the government for bringing us a judge to solve our problems.
The mobile courts are meant to replace a legal system that has been neglected after decades of conflict.
Part of the UNMISS mandate to protect civilians is to ensure accountability for serious crimes, including SGBV and CRSV. And so one of the things that UNMISS, together with UNDP, have been trying to do is to support these kinds of mobile courts so that they are able to go to places where one or more of the justice sector is either missing or needs additional support to be able to ensure access to justice to the most vulnerable people.
The court will handle serious crimes committed in Yambio.
We started today with 3 cases. One is a case of rape and theft. It was a very fruitful day.
More court sessions are expected to take place over the next month. The UN-supported mobile courts have been active for about a year throughout South Sudan, where there are no legal structures. Astatal, CGTN.
Land expropriation in South Africa has polarized the country and is alarming investors. That's according to the South Africa Institute for Race Relations. The institute believes that most South Africans are more keen on getting jobs and houses rather than land to farm. The institute is a think tank that promotes ideas about policy solutions in South Africa. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
Many South Africans agree that the historical background of land ownership in this country needs to be addressed. But to ensure that while doing so, the economic stability of the country continues to be reinforced.
The land issue in South Africa remains quite sensitive, emotive and very controversial. And government is increasingly coming under severe pressure because 20 years after the end of apartheid, most of the land still remains in the hands of the white minority.
Hence, after the willing seller, willing buyer policy failed, the National Assembly passed a motion to review Section 25 of the Constitution to allow for land expropriation without compensation. Many are happy with this, while a vocal few are rejecting it. Some of the reasons they advance is that land transferred to land restitution beneficiaries simply went to waste.
We know that about 70% of transferred land has fallen out of production. Often the people who were farming on that land have lost their jobs. There have been no real benefits. The Fiscal and Financial Commission did a study a couple of years ago and reported, in fact, that land reform beneficiaries were worse off than those who had never benefited from land reform at all.
Critics also claim that it will deter investors from investing in South Africa.
The implications of this policy, which embrace a great deal of expropriation without compensation, is going to mean primarily a slowdown, no, a stopping of foreign fixed capital investment. Do we need foreign capital? Yes, indeed, we're a capital short as a major resource country. We don't have enough capital to develop our own economy, to develop industry and commerce, to grow the economy, to provide new opportunities for new profits, for new revenue to be earned, for government to earn revenue on that as well.
Earlier this month, Parliament received the first draft of the legislation to amend Section 25 of the Constitution. Government continues to urge South Africans not to panic about land expropriation without compensation. President Cyril Ramaphosa has over time emphasized that this matter will be handled carefully through dialogue and discussion. Yudison Jamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Your business news up next with Raman Young.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in business. Ethiopia and the IMF reach a preliminary agreement on a near $3 billion bailout. And Ghana's headline inflation has gone up by 50 basis points in November. It now stands at 8.2%.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back. The International Monetary Fund and the authorities in Ethiopia have reached a preliminary agreement on a $2.9 billion reform package. Now, the funds will support the African country's economic reform program if approved by the executive board. Later in the month, the Ethiopian reform program will focus on a range of issues, key among them addressing the country's crippling foreign exchange shortage. It will also strengthen oversight and management at state-owned enterprises in order to contain some growing debt vulnerabilities over there. The money will also be used to free up domestic revenue for poverty reduction and essential infrastructure spending. The financial sector will also get a slice of the pie, with reforms to support private investment and modernize the monetary policy framework in the country as well. On to West Africa now. Ghana's inflation rate shot up by 50 basis points in the month of November to hit 8.2%. That matters because it's the highest number since a rebased CPI came out some 3 months ago. According to Ghana's statistical service, alcoholic beverages, tobacco and narcotics, the index for those commodities was up by 13.4%. Transport went up by 12.3%, and these were the divisions with the highest rates of inflation. But due to its relative importance in consumption, the food category is still the biggest driver of inflation in Ghana, even more so than last month. The food and non-alcoholic beverages index went up, essentially recorded year-on-year inflation rather, at 8.4%. That's 140 basis points higher than October of the same year. But the non-food year-on-year inflation rate for November was just 8%, down from 8.2% recorded in the month of October. On to Nigeria now. Citizens there will be able to monitor daily government transactions. The country has essentially launched an open treasury portal, as they call it, where all government ministries and agencies have to publish their official financial dealings. It's part of a much broader plan to eliminate corruption in the public sector. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with this report.
An event to once again propel government's fight against corruption, especially in the public sector. All of its business transactions would now be in public domain, and that's through a new portal, opentreasury.gov.ng.
Cementing government commitment to improving governance and supplementing the recently launched whistleblower policy and equipping the general population with the tools they need to report financial wrongdoing.
The policy was formulated in line with government's stand to fight corruption, but to also ensure conformance with global best practices, to ensure that there is transparency and accountability, but to also equip the citizens to hold both all levels of government to account.
Nigeria is tagged one of the most corrupt countries in the world. The Corruption Perception Index puts Nigeria at 144 out of 175 least corrupt nations. According to a report by audit firm PricewaterhouseCoopers, if not dealt with quickly, Nigeria could lose up to 37% of its GDP to corruption by 2030. The cost is equivalent to $2,000 per person living in Nigeria at the time. Fighting corruption was one of President Muhammadu Buhari's campaign promises, so the policy serves to keep government workers in check.
Public officers to act in awareness of the reality that information about their fiduciary responsibilities and actions will be easily accessed by not only law enforcement agencies, but also the general public.
All government establishments have a 3-month deadline to comply with the policy. A team made up of government and civil society would monitor and ensure compliance. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Over in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa has acknowledged that Eskom's inability to provide electricity continue, it could essentially plunge the country into yet another economic recession. Mines and other large enterprises that are heavy consumers of electricity had to suspend operations earlier this week following the implementation of Stage 6 load shedding. That essentially takes some 6,000 megawatts of generation capacity off the grid entirely. Now, while the president suspects that sabotage may have been partly to blame for the power cuts this week, economists are concerned of dire consequences to the country's broader economy. Here's CGTN's Alexander Majala with the details.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says he suspects sabotage at power stations led to lost capacity during the past week. It led to severe outages, the worst the country has seen in a decade. The South African president has called for an investigation.
What has also come out as a great concern is that there has been a measure of sabotage that has led to the loss of, during this period, of 2,000 megawatts, where someone in the ESCOM system disconnected one of the instruments that finally led to one of the boilers tripping and us losing as much as 2,000, I think it was 2 boilers.
According to Ramaphosa, the state utility will work to stabilize the power grid by the end of March. A week of heavy rains across parts of South Africa caused flooding, aggravating problems at the cash-strapped power firm. Ramaphosa cut short a trip to Egypt to deal with the crisis that has businessmen at their wits' end.
Every day my average is like 10,000 in per day, but previous day maybe 3,000 earning one day. It means 7,000 one day loss, and 2 days equal to 7 plus 7 is equal to 14,000. It my loss. If is again like coming day, if you think like that is can do is electricity again, then is affected more business.
How can we say we inviting people to come and open business there if we don't have electricity? Electricity is a basic need. We need electricity.
The power outages are also raising some security concerns.
These thugs, they are going to take advantage, especially when the electricity is not there. They're going to enter into a house, they can rob you, they can rape you because there's no light.
Struggling state-owned companies have been a major headache for Ramaphosa, who came to power nearly 2 years ago. He had promised to reverse years of mismanagement and economic stagnation. Ramaphosa also proposed drastic steps, if necessary, to ensure their survival. ESCOM, which generates more than 90% of the country's power, is widely regarded as the most serious risk to an economy on the brink of recession. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
On to France now. Continuing strikes in the capital of Paris have brought the city to a near standstill. Union workers are about to continue with their walkouts and their mass demonstrations to protest against planned government pension reforms. The workers did make one large concession, though, but as Tony Waterman now explains, it's unlikely to get people off the street.
Universality, fairness, and responsibility. Those were the principles French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said the pension overhaul would stick to.
Il n'y a pas d'agenda caché.
There is no hidden agenda. We are not looking to penny pinch here or there. We don't want to hurt anyone. On the contrary, we want to protect the purchasing power of workers and the purchasing power of pensioners.
In a major concession, he said workers born before 1975 would not be affected by the changes at all, pushing the reform back more than a decade. But union workers aren't satisfied.
The age measures announced are insufficient, particularly on the issue of hardship. I am meeting with the CFDT National Office to find out how we will act in the coming weeks.
The government also stuck to its promise to keep the official retirement age at 62, which is among the lowest in Europe, although workers will only receive full benefits if they work until 64. France's 42 different pension schemes will also be condensed into one universal system, getting rid of the so-called special regimes, which offer exclusive benefits like early retirement to certain employees. It will also become a points-based system, with workers receiving points for each hour that they work. It's unclear, though, how the value of these points will be determined. On the streets of Paris, reaction has been mixed.
To me, it's a scam. They say the legal retirement age will still be 62, but it's actually a way to reduce pensions, because if we do not work until the pivot age, which is now 64, we won't get the pseudo bonus and our full pensions.
If it's implemented, I think it's great, but I don't know where the money will come from, as the country is already in debt. How will it be funded? I've always had doubt about these kinds of promises.
Certain jobs, especially the most painful ones, should be kept apart from this new reform, even though it's good to have some other jobs.
The details of the plan have done little to quell union resistance. A massive protest is planned for next Tuesday, and the strike is indefinite, meaning the gridlock in and around Paris could be here for Christmas. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Paris.
The U.S. Federal Reserve is holding rates steady, leaving its benchmark lending rate in the range of 1.5% to 1.75% after its final policy meeting of 2019. The U.S. Central Bank also suggested it has no plans to make any changes to rates in 2020, despite, of course, the pressure we see on Twitter from President Donald Trump to chop rates. Here's CGTN's Giles Gibson with the latest.
Fed Chairman Jerome Powell wrapped up 2019 with a bullish outlook for the U.S. economy.
Our economic outlook remains a favorable one, despite global developments and ongoing risks. With our decisions through the course of the past year, we believe that monetary policy is well positioned to serve the American people by supporting continued economic growth, a strong job market, and inflation near our symmetric 2% goal.
Markets on Wall Street jumped slightly after the final rates decision of the year. US President Donald Trump has spent much of 2019, though, attacking the Fed and its chairman. In a speech in New York last month, he accused the central bank of holding the US economy back.
It puts us at a competitive disadvantage to other countries. Yet in the face of this reality, our economic policies have ushered in an unprecedented tide of prosperity surging all throughout the nation.
While insisting on its independence from the White House, the Fed has given the president some of what he wants. Powell has steadily cut interest rates over the course of 2019 amid uncertainty in global trade. Some of that uncertainty is starting to lift, with the USMCA trade deal between the US, Canada and Mexico almost over the line. The Fed also removed an earlier reference to uncertainties from its monthly statement, perhaps signaling optimism over the US-China trade negotiations. The state of those talks will become clearer in the next few days, with the next round of US tariffs on Chinese goods looming on Sunday. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
One final story for you. This one from the tech world, well, tech and politics. A German telecommunications operator says it has picked China's Huawei and Finland's Nokia to supply equipment it needs to build a 5G network. Telefonica Deutschland, that's the German unit of Spain's Telefonica, said it hopes to start work on building out this network next year, even though German authorities are yet to finalize rules governing suppliers. Rebecca Bundan reports.
Telefonica Deutschland, which operates in Germany under the O2 brand, says that Huawei will work on its 5G network with Nokia on a 50-50 basis. It's being seen as a seal of approval for Huawei from what's one of Germany's biggest telecom operators. Huawei has repeatedly denied that there are any security issues linked to the use of its equipment. But just last week, Deutsche Telekom said that it had stopped doing deals with 5G vendors as it awaits clarity on what's become a political debate in Germany over Huawei's presence. The German government is currently in the process of working on security guidelines for its 5G network. Chancellor Angela Merkel says that no bidders should be excluded from the 5G process because of the importance of the infrastructure to the German economy. But there are some politicians who are calling for Parliament to have more of a say in the matter. Telefonica Deutschland is investing billions of euros over the coming years in its mobile network, and it wants to start work on its 5G expansion in the first quarter of the new year, starting in Germany's 5 biggest cities, including Berlin and Frankfurt. The company does say that the work will depend on receiving the necessary security certification, but it seems quite confident that this will be cleared quickly. Rebecca Bundan, CGTN, Frankfurt.
And I'll leave you there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. We'll focus yet again on South Africa's devastating power crisis. What exactly is going on and how can it be fixed, at least by March, as Eskom claim they will? We'll find out live from Johannesburg at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. You are watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, the Chinese government sets up a Mandarin teaching center in Durban, South Africa.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
To South Africa, where students at a technical training school in the port city of Durban have just received a brand new Mandarin teaching center. That's courtesy of a donation by the Chinese government. The Clarewood Secondary School will now be able to provide free Mandarin lessons to students from grade 8 to grade 11. CGTN's Travis Andrews has that story.
Clarewood Secondary School is like many other technical education institutions in the country. It may lack resources, but it's certainly not short on talent. That, though, is set to change, because they've just received a new Mandarin school, which was handed over by the Chinese embassy in South Africa. The new teaching station is set to give learners a chance to explore new avenues in building a successful future, including pursuing work in technical fields in China.
I think this is a very good opportunity for the students. They can be involved in the Mandarin classes, and we will teach them start from the basic greetings and move forward to the intermediate level in the future. So students, they can master some basic greetings and some usage of the expression in the daily life.
The donation is in line with China's commitment to invest in education in Africa, which is expected to be a catalyst in further developing the potential of people on the continent. But it's not just investing money, but also time, with the curriculum being spearheaded by a team of Mandarin lecturers from the Confucius Institute in Durban.
Start from last year, the Confucius Institute at DUT will start to promote the Mandarin Plus. So it's called Mandarin Plus because it's connect the Mandarin with the technical skills, and it's like the Mandarin is just like a bridge. Just use the Mandarin as a bridge and to connect it to your future career plan.
The school has also set its own ambitious plans, including pursuing a student exchange program, and the donation of new computer equipment will certainly play an important role in those exchanges. Now, Chinese companies have also come to the assistance of the school and are offering their students exciting new work placement opportunities.
Beijing Automotive Holdings, the director, was also present, and he assured me that when his plant is up and running, which is almost, he will actually employ learners from my school to work at the factory with learnership and permanent employment. We offer automotive at our school as well.
Students are officially set to commence with their lessons in early January 2020, with the doors being open to explore career ventures that can build on the real potential of South Africa. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Durban.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. South Africa ready for a home ground challenge in the Cape Town Rugby Sevens this weekend.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks,